Ethan Carter had always envisioned Willowbrook, California, as the idyllic escape he needed after years of chaotic city life. The 1920s craftsman bungalow he'd purchased, with its wraparound porch and ivy-clad walls, promised tranquility. But within a week of unpacking, Ethan discovered the neighborhood's shadowy underbelly. Karen McAllister, the HOA president, whose tyrannical enforcement of rules transformed Willowbrook into a Kafkaesque nightmare. Karen, a 58-year-old former corporate litigation attorney, had moved to Willowbrook after her divorce, channeling her legal prowess into micromanaging every aspect of life in the subdivision. Her neon-pink blazers, oversized clipboards, and habit of reciting HOA bylaws verbatim made her a local legend, or, as the residents called her behind her back, the HOA Nazi. The covenant Karen enforced was a 200-page monstrosity, drafted by her late husband, a control-obsessed developer. It dictated everything from the height of Christmas lights, no more than 6 feet, to the color of front doors, neutral tones only. Ethan had skimmed the document during his purchase, dismissing it as typical HOA fluff. His first mistake. The trouble began with a misplaced trash can. On Ethan's first Monday in Willowbrook, he'd forgotten to wheel his bin to the curb by 6 a.m., as per Section 12.3 of the Covenant. Karen, who patrolled the streets daily in her cherry-red Jeep Wrangler, pulled up at 6:05 a.m., snapped a photo of the bin, and issued a warning. Ethan, still groggy, apologized and moved it immediately. Karen's eyes narrowed. The next day, she returned, accusing him of violating the curb appeal clause by leaving a stack of moving boxes on his driveway. Ethan, flustered, moved them inside. But Karen's scrutiny only intensified. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen's accusations piled up like a legal assault. She cited his overgrown hydrangeas, they exceeded the covenant's 12-inch height limit, his unapproved garden gnomes, they were non-traditional decor, and even his too bright front door paint, a cheerful cobalt blue, which Karen deemed distracting. Each violation carried a $500 fine, payable within 48 hours. Ethan, a freelance graphic designer with irregular income, paid the first 2 penalties to avoid escalation. But Karen's vendetta was personal. The catalyst came when Ethan's neighbor, Tom Johnson, a retired Marine with a dry wit and a penchant for vintage Harleys, lent him an old pickup truck to haul furniture. Tom had once been fined $1,500 for parking his motorcycle in the driveway overnight, a vehicle storage violation. Karen, however, had a vendetta against Tom, whom she'd labeled a rebellious element. When she spotted Ethan's borrowed truck, its dented bumper and rusted tailgate, she reported it to the HOA board. The next morning, an email arrived. Ethan faced a $2,000 fine for operating a non-compliant vehicle on HOA premises. Ethan, now paranoid, spent nights poring over the covenant. He discovered Section 18.7, which stated that driveways must be 100% within the property owner's legal boundaries. His driveway, a narrow asphalt strip between his house and the shared sidewalk, overlapped slightly with the HOA's common area. Karen, seizing the opportunity, demanded he repave it to exact specifications, a $10,000 project, within 30 days. Ethan, who'd spent his savings on the down payment, refused. Then came the blockade. One chilly October morning, Ethan awoke to find his driveway blocked by a rusted grill, a broken lawnmower, and a for sale sign from Karen's own yard. A neon pink note read, "Compliance is mandatory. HOA number 1. Enraged, Ethan called the police, but they declined to intervene, citing a civil dispute. Karen, smug, appeared at the curb, sipping chai tea from a thermos. "You'll learn, Mr. Carter. Willowbrook isn't that kind of neighborhood." Ethan's resolve hardened. He spent nights researching property law, discovering California's Civil Code 1355, which allowed homeowners to modify driveways if they didn't infringe on others' rights. His driveway, he argued, was entirely on his deed's property. Karen, however, had allies, the widowed Mrs. Hargrove, who'd once sued a neighbor over a too-green lawn, and Larry, the HOA treasurer, a sleazy real estate agent who'd pushed Karen's agenda to boost his sales. Ethan's only ally was Sarah Lynn, a sharp-eyed public defender who'd agreed to review his case pro bono after hearing his story at a local cafe. Sarah's analysis revealed a loophole. If Ethan's driveway was legally his, he could repurpose it however he liked as long as it didn't block emergency access. Build a drawbridge, she joked. Make it a tourist attraction. The idea stuck. Ethan, a tinkerer with a knack for DIY projects, began sketching designs. He'd need a trench to isolate his property, a drawbridge to control access, and a legal shield to protect his actions. Karen escalated her tactics. She filed a complaint with the city, claiming Ethan's potential construction violated noise ordinances. Contractors he'd hired backed out after mysterious HOA recommendations. Meanwhile, Karen's allies spread rumors that Ethan was unstable, causing some neighbors to avoid his house. The final blow came when Mia, his girlfriend, and a nurse, refused to visit, citing the stress of his feud. "You're becoming like her," she said, tears in her eyes. Ethan, sleep-deprived and furious, made a vow he'd fight Karen's tyranny with wit, law, and audacity, or lose everything. The next morning, he rented a backhoe. Ethan Carter's backhoe roared to life at dawn, its steel teeth biting into the asphalt of his driveway. The plan was audacious: excavate a 12-foot deep trench around his property to isolate his land from the HOA's common areas, then install a drawbridge over the gap. He'd spent weeks refining the design with Sarah Lynn, the public defender, who'd confirmed that California's Civil Code 1355 allowed such modifications as long as they didn't impede emergency vehicles. But Karen McAllister's eyes were always watching. By day 2 of digging, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Karen's Jeep circled Ethan's house like a vulture, its passenger window rolled down to broadcast her fury. "This is illegal," she screamed, her voice crackling through a megaphone. Ethan, sweat dripping into his beard, ignored her, focusing on the trench's precise dimensions: 12 feet deep, 15 feet wide, measured to the inch using a laser level. His contractor, a gruff ex-Marine named Hank, had reluctantly agreed to help after Sarah threatened to expose Larry, the HOA treasurer, for falsifying inspection reports to inflate his real estate commissions. The excavation revealed an unexpected ally, Mrs. Hargrove, the widow who'd once sued a neighbor over a too-green lawn. She'd been furious when Karen denied her request to plant hydrangeas, citing non-compliant flora. Now, she brought Ethan lemonade and blueprints of her own HOA disputes. "That woman's got a vault of dirty secrets," she muttered, her eyes sharp behind cat-eye glasses. "She'll stop at nothing." But not all neighbors were on Ethan's side. Tom Johnson, the retired Marine, initially cheered Ethan's rebellion. "About time someone stood up to Karen," he'd said, offering to loan Ethan his pickup again. Yet when Karen threatened to revoke Tom's parking permit for his Harley, he backed away, muttering, "I can't afford another fine." Ethan's resolve wavered as he watched Tom retreat, the man's face a mask of guilt. Meanwhile, Karen's sabotage intensified. On the third day, the backhoe's hydraulic pump mysteriously failed, leaving Ethan stranded. Hank, grumbling about sabotage, traced the issue to a severed cable. The next morning, a no trespassing sign appeared on Ethan's fence, signed by the HOA board. Karen stood beside it, flanked by Larry and 2 silent landscapers. "This ends now," she declared, her voice trembling with menace. Ethan retaliated with paperwork. Sarah had drafted a cease and desist letter citing his property rights, which he filed with the city. But Karen outmaneuvered him. She'd already reported the trench to the Department of Transportation, claiming it endangered public safety. The city inspector arrived, a stern woman named Officer Rivera, who demanded immediate halt to the digging. Ethan, sweating, pulled out his deed in Civil Code 1355. "This land is mine," he insisted. Officer Rivera's expression softened. "Keep your permit updated, Mr. Carter. I'll hold off the HOA for 24 hours. The reprieve was fleeting. That night, Ethan returned to find the trench filled with concrete. Karen's handiwork, she'd hired a midnight crew to sabotage his progress. Enraged, he called Sarah, who urged him to document everything. "This is harassment," she said. "We'll countersue." Ethan, however, had already devised a darker plan. He'd discovered Karen's late husband had donated land for the HOA's common areas, including Ethan's driveway, in exchange for kickbacks from a now-defunct construction firm. The records were buried in county archives, but Sarah's legal team was digging. Then came the betrayal. Mia, Ethan's girlfriend, showed up unannounced, her face pale. "Karen knows about the trench," she said, clutching a folder. "She threatened to expose your past." Ethan froze. Mia had never mentioned her ties to Karen until now. She'd once worked as Karen's paralegal, handling HOA disputes. "She's blackmailing me," Mia whispered. "She says you're unhinged and destabilizing property values." Ethan's heart sank. Had Karen manipulated Mia into spying? The next morning, Ethan faced a new crisis. The Drawbridge's steel frame arrived, but the delivery truck couldn't navigate the blocked driveway. Desperate, he enlisted help from the neighborhood's children, who'd been fascinated by the trench. 10-year-old Lily Nguyen, whose parents had been fined for overgrown hedges, organized a makeshift pulley system using her dad's winch. "We're saving Ethan's dream," she declared, rallying the kids. Karen, watching from her porch, scowled as the kids cheered. By day 7, the trench was complete. Ethan's lawyer, a bulldog named Raj Patel, arrived with a temporary injunction halting the HOA's legal actions. "They're bluffing," he said. "Karen's got no proof your driveway isn't yours." But Karen had one last trick. She leaked Ethan's past to the local news. Years earlier, he'd been sued for nuisance after a party he'd hosted in college. The headline blared, "HOA rebels troubled past surfaces." Ethan's resolve faltered until Sarah revealed the smoking gun. Karen's late husband had indeed embezzled HOA funds, using the common areas to launder money. The evidence was solid, but Karen could still retaliate. "Play her game," Sarah advised. "Finish the drawbridge. Make it the story." At dusk, the drawbridge was installed, a 20-foot steel marvel with a hydraulic lift, controlled by a keypad. Ethan tested it, watching as the structure rose smoothly. Karen, watching from her Jeep, seethed. "You'll regret this," she spat. But Ethan had already called the press. The next morning, headlines read, "Willowbrook homeowner fights HOA tyranny with Drawbridge." The internet erupted. Karen's reputation crumbled as the community rallied behind Ethan. Even Tom Johnson, the Marine, brought a case of beer. "Nice trench," he said, grinning. "Think it'll hold a moat?" The legal battle was far from over, but Ethan's defiance had sparked something bigger. Karen's empire of rules was cracking one trench at a time. The courtroom in Willowbrook's municipal building crackled with tension. Ethan Carter stood beside his lawyer, Raj Patel, as Karen McAllister, flanked by her high-priced attorney, glared from the opposing bench. The case, Carter vs. Willowbrook HOA, had become a national spectacle, drawing reporters from 60 Minutes and the Daily Beast. The question was simple: was Ethan's drawbridge legal? The answer hinged on a labyrinth of property law, buried secrets, and a decades-old scandal. Raj opened with a bang. "This HOA's common areas were never legally established," he declared, projecting a faded 1980s land deed onto a screen. "Karen's late husband, Richard McAllister, donated land to the HOA without proper zoning approvals. The common areas are a myth." The crowd gasped. Karen's lawyer, a slick Ivy Leaguer named Gregory Voss, objected, but Judge Rodriguez allowed the evidence. The embezzlement scandal erupted next. Sarah Lynn, now Ethan's co-counsel, called Mrs. Hargrove to the stand. The widow, her voice trembling, revealed how Karen had blackmailed her into voting against her hydrangeas. "She threatened to expose my son's DUI," Mrs. Hargrove testified. Then came Larry, the HOA treasurer, who'd flip sides after Raj threatened to expose his role in falsifying inspection reports. "Karen paid me to lie," he admitted, his face pale. "She's been corrupt since day one." Karen's composure unraveled. She'd banked on the court dismissing Ethan as a renegade, but the evidence was damning. Yet she had one weapon, Mia. On the fourth day of testimony, Mia took the stand. Ethan's heart sank as she described their relationship's unraveling. "Karen knew about my past," she said, tears streaming. "She showed me Ethan's college party lawsuit. She said if I didn't help her, she'd ruin him." The courtroom buzzed. Raj cross-examined Mia gently, but the damage was done. Ethan's character was now in question. Outside court, Karen's allies rallied. A protest group, Willowbrook's Voice, picketed the courthouse, waving signs, "Drawbridges don't belong in subdivisions." Among them stood Tom Johnson, now clutching a Support Karen banner. Ethan's chest tightened. "You too, Tom," he muttered. Tom avoided eye contact. The trial's climax came via a surprise witness, Lily Nguyen's father, a former city planner. He'd discovered that Richard McAllister's land donation had included a clause requiring the HOA to maintain universal access to all driveways, a rule Karen had ignored. Her blockade was illegal, he testified. But Karen had a final gambit. On the trial's final morning, a news helicopter circled Ethan's house. Karen's team had leaked footage of the Drawbridge's hydraulic system malfunctioning during a storm, nearly collapsing. "It's a danger," Voss argued. Raj countered with engineering reports proving the structure's stability, but the jury seemed swayed. Meanwhile, Willowbrook's streets erupted. Ethan's trench in Drawbridge had become a viral sensation, dubbed the Freedom Bridge by activists. TikTok influencers filmed themselves crossing it, while local teens held HOA hell raves in the trench. Karen's Jeep was vandalized with anti-HOA graffiti, and her LinkedIn profile was hacked to read, "Karen McAllister, professional tyrant." The verdict arrived at 3 p.m. Judge Rodriguez's gavel fell, the HOA's claims are dismissed. The drawbridge is legal under Civil Code 1355. Ms. McAllister must pay Mr. Carter's legal fees. The courtroom erupted. Ethan hugged Raj and Sarah, tears of relief streaming down his face. But victory was bittersweet. Mia had vanished, leaving a note, "I'm sorry." "She's still watching." Karen, her face ashen, stormed out, muttering threats. That night, Ethan's house was firebombed. The blaze gutted his living room, but the drawbridge stood intact. Security footage showed Larry's face in the shadows, fleeing the scene. Raj vowed to press charges, but Karen had already fled Willowbrook, her neon-pink blazer replaced by a one-way ticket to Panama. Yet Ethan's fight wasn't over. The HOA's board, now leaderless, dissolved in chaos. Residents began rewriting the covenant, with Mrs. Hargrove and Lily's father leading the charge. Tom, remorseful, offered to rebuild Ethan's home. "I'm with you now," he said, nodding at the drawbridge. Time to raise hell. As winter set in, Willowbrook's streets buzzed with hope. The drawbridge, now lit with fairy lights, became a symbol of defiance. Ethan, though scarred, smiled. Karen's reign was over, but the trenches she dug ran deeper than any HOA rule. The ashes of Ethan's living room smoldered under winter rains, but the drawbridge remained a gleaming sentinel. Willowbrook's residents, once cowed by Karen's tyranny, now gathered at the structure, its steel beams draped in fairy lights. The Freedom Bridge had become a pilgrimage site, a symbol of rebellion against overreach. Ethan, though weary, hosted a community potluck there, serving chili and pie under a sky streaked with stars. Tom Johnson, the Marine, had rebuilt Ethan's home using reclaimed wood from Karen's abandoned properties. "She left town in a hurry," he grunted, handing Ethan a freshly framed photo of their old craftsman. "Found her place trashed, like someone beat us to it." Ethan nodded, his eyes lingering on the horizon. Mia returned 2 weeks later, her face pale but resolute. "Karen's gone, but she left a parting gift," she said, thrusting a folder into Ethan's hands. Inside were photos of a Panama City mansion, its gates adorned with Willowbrook's HOA logo. Karen had bought it under a pseudonym, but the real shock was the headline, "Panama extradites former HOA president over fraud." A Panama City newspaper had exposed her ties to a money laundering ring. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's always one step ahead," he muttered. The HOA's collapse had birthed a new era. Residents voted to dissolve the old covenant, replacing it with a community charter drafted by Mrs. Hargrove and Lily's father. Rules now prioritized neighborly respect over legalistic control, no more fines for too bright doors or overgrown flowers. Even Karen's former allies, like Larry, faced lawsuits for their role in the embezzlement. Yet shadows lingered. One icy morning, Ethan found a package on his porch, a neon-pink HOA clipboard, its pages filled with Karen's spidery handwriting. "You think this is over? I'll rot in a Panamanian jail, but I'll drag you with me." Beneath it lay a USB drive labeled "The Truth." Sarah Lynn, now Ethan's legal advisor, warned him against opening it. "Karen's last trick," she said. "It could be a trap." But curiosity, and a flicker of justice, compelled Ethan. The drive contained files implicating Karen's late husband in a 1980s land scam that had displaced a black family to build Willowbrook. The victims' descendants, now in their 70s, were tracked down and awarded reparations. Karen's legacy, it turned out, was built on theft. Spring arrived with a reckoning. At the Freedom Bridge Festival, Willowbrook celebrated its rebirth. Children raced in the trench-turned garden, now blooming with hydrangeas and Karen's hated gnomes. Tom gave a speech, his voice cracking. We stood up to a monster. Now we're family. Mia, reinstated as Ethan's partner, handed him a key. I found this in Karen's trash, she said. It fit a safety deposit box in Panama City. Inside were documents proving Karen's fraud and a single item, a faded photo of Karen and Richard laughing on a beach. She loved this place once, Mia whispered. Then she became it. Ethan's final act came that summer. He donated the Drawbridge to the city, which renamed it Carter's Causeway. The USB drive, its secrets laid bare, was placed in a museum exhibit titled When Rules Become Chains. Years later, a plaque would read, To Ethan Carter, who dared to dig deeper. This bridge stands not just over trenches, but over fear itself. Karen's fate? She vanished after her Panama trial, her name scrubbed from records. Some say she died in a fire, others claim she's a ghost haunting HOAs worldwide. Ethan, now a community organizer, smiles when reporters ask about the Drawbridge. It wasn't about the law, he says. It was about remembering, no one gets to own your freedom. And in Willowbrook, where hydrangeas bloom wild and HOA meetings are optional, the trenches are gone.